President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has finally changed his tune and is now publicly willing to consider changing land for peace, or at least that's what the headlines are saying. Welcome today, by the way. This is our no, I'm sorry, this is not our intelligence brief. That's coming up later. Just kind of a preview here. We got our deep dive intelligence brief coming up almost immediately following this at 11 a.m. today. Let me not mislead you. So we're going to have all that stuff there. We're going to talk about a lot of that. But before we did that, we thought it was important to cover this specific topic in a little bit more detail, give you a deep dive on what Zelensky is saying. So the headlines have been flying around everywhere that finally, after all this time, and we've been saying from the outset that the war was unwinnable. There was no point in not negotiating because they don't have the resources. They don't have the leverage. There's all they can do is lose slow or lose quicker or have some kind of negotiated settlement. Now, finally, it appears that Zelensky has said, okay, you know what? Sure, we'll talk about some peace. But then when you actually listen to what he says, you have to start scratching your head again and going, wait a minute, what did he say? Because one of the things I've said in nearly every clip that we've shown from him, and really for a long time, but definitely in the last number of months, I mean, go all the way back to the NATO summit in Washington this summer and going forward, it's like a lot of delusionary thinking. This is maybe a different kind of delusionary thinking. Watch this clip and tell me if you see where he's willing to say, yes, I've talked to people and I'm going to give up land. Or is he saying that at all?
One alternative, perhaps, again, this is reported from the United States, and it's fairly simple, really, is that Ukraine joins NATO, but Russia takes control and keeps the land that it has to date. Would that be a possibility?
Ніхто не пропонував нам бути в НАТО.
No one has offered us to be in NATO with just one part or another part of Ukraine.
Закінчити гарячу стадію.
That's for once.
Факт.
The fact is that it is a solution to stop the hot stage of the war, because we can just give the NATO membership to the part of Ukraine that is under our control.
Факт. Можна було б, ніхто не пропонував.
Yes, it could be possible, but no one offered.
Треба робити.
But the invitation must be given to Ukraine within its internationally recognized border.
Ви не можете давати тільки частині.
You can't give invitation to just one part of a country. Why? Because thus you would recognize that Ukraine is only that territory of Ukraine and the other one is Russia.
Тому я і сказав, юридично ми не маємо права.
So legally, by law, we have no right to recognize the occupied territory as territory of Russia.
І тут не можна помилятись.
And here we must not make any mistake.
Гарячу стадію війни.
But if we want to stop the hot stage of the war,
зонтик, амбрелу,
we should take under NATO umbrella the territory of Ukraine that we have under our control.
швидко. А далі
That's what we need to do fast. And then Ukraine can get back the other part of its territory diplomatically.
So let me summarize what he said right there. And put yourself in the shoes of Vladimir Putin, who's probably watching this from his national security control center in Moscow. And he's listening closely to see what Zelensky is saying and see if there's room for negotiation, see if there's room for, okay, that's the basis for which we can begin some talks. Zelensky said that he wants all of his territory, all of it. He doesn't want to let any of it go because you can't have NATO, a part of a country, he said. So we have to keep all of our territory. Then he said, but we're willing to periodically or temporarily rather cede some land to get the hot phase of the war over. That's what he said there. So he wants Putin to agree to end the war, to end the hot phase, and temporarily keep the rest of his country. In the meantime, whatever is left during this temporary phase will be covered with a NATO umbrella. Except that he also said, well, no one's actually told me that they're going to give me this umbrella. I'm just saying it would be cool if we had it. That's the rough translation in real language of what he's saying there. And then he's even adding in, and then at some point later on, we'll diplomatically get our land back. So everything, here's what that Vladimir Putin has to be thinking. Okay, here's the deal I'm offering you, Vlad. Just what do you think here? Because this is probably the best deal you're going to get. If you're smart, you'll take it now. Everything that you've done for nearly 3 years and all the territory that you've taken you'll eventually give it back to me. And I'm going to have NATO umbrella and then it's some kind of NATO alliance on my country at the end of this. And you get to go home eventually. But you can keep this for a while. That's cool. Okay. Maybe Zelensky missed it. Maybe he wasn't paying attention from 2008 forward. That no, NATO in Ukraine was a red line for which he was willing to go to war and has waged a war for 3 years. He has now captured a growing portion of Ukrainian territory. It's increasing in the scale and scope and the ferocity with which they're taking territory. They have unveiled a number of new weapons, not the least of which is the Oreshnik missile, the hypersonic missile, intermediate range ballistic missile, which, according to the experts we've talked to, is not defensible by the Western side. Certainly not the Ukraine side. It definitely wasn't when it was used a week or so ago. So Putin has a defense industrial base, millions of potential troops, more than 1 million on active duty, somewhere close to 1.5 million by the end of the month, the end of next month. And he has all these alliances that he didn't have before. So he has this, an open pipeline from North Korea, an open pipeline from Iran. So all of these things he's got in his favor. And on the other side, he sees that the West is depleted. They're running out of interceptor missiles. They have a pittance, a very small number of long-range missiles. They're still having a hard time getting artillery shells produced. And most of all, the Ukraine side is running out of men. Their economy has been absolutely devastated and brought to the brink to where they might not even have electricity or any heat in any percentage throughout the entire country, and possibly even weeks from now. Now, in that environment, where is the motivation for Vladimir Putin to go, sure, Zelensky, I'll give you everything you want, even though I've earned it all? Listen, aside from how absurd it is to say that out loud, if Putin even were to consider something like that, then there probably would be a coup, a palace coup in the Kremlin. Nobody is in Russia, whether it's the inside Politburo or just regular people in the street, are going to say all this stuff we've sacrificed, all the blood that we've sacrificed in this, and now then you're going to just hand it back. Obviously, that's so absurd. It doesn't even need to be said out loud that it would never, ever, under any circumstances, be contemplated by Vladimir Putin. He's not going to. That's not how negotiations work. And the reason I emphasize that is to show how absurd this is. All the Western media is just awash with these headlines. Zelensky finally willing to trade land for peace. I've seen it all over the place. And they're saying, is this a possibility? And they never talk about what I just told you. This is one of the reasons why Western media and the mainstream media in the U.S. in particular is losing credibility left and right. They just keep shedding credibility as the months pass, because something that should be so self-evident, this should have been, if not mocked, at least put on the table as they talked about these headlines that said, but it's unclear why Vladimir Putin, from a position of substantial strength, would ever compromise and give away all the things that he fought for. And yet I've already been on a number of news shows in the West, and I've had to say this stuff out loud. And it's like it just goes over the head of the reporters in some cases. And I just don't understand why people want to have this idea that, yes, this can happen. There can be land for peace. Now, an interesting theory I've heard of late it revolves around why Joe Biden, after the election, after he lost the election, chose to allow the Ukraine side to use long-range weapons when he had said no all the time. When Zelensky came to Washington in July asking for long-range weapons, when he came to New York in September asking for long-range weapons, why he said no, Biden did all this time. And then after the election, when he's only got, at that point, barely 2 months before he leaves office, then suddenly he allows it. One interesting theory is that, well, it's to give Trump some leverage. He's going to give Trump leverage to say, wow, this is kind of a kooky guy. And so the Biden is, but now Trump's going to come in, the reasonable guy, and he'll negotiate. Listen, that is really infantile. I'm sorry, there's no nicer way to put it. Again, it suffers from the same thing that this whole, fake land for peace alleged offer is. It's detached from reality. If you don't start with the concrete on concrete, metal on metal reality that Russia has all the power cards in its hands and can dictate terms, or ignore all the discussions and just keep rolling to the West. You have to offer something that Putin has a motivation to say, all right, we'll give you this, that otherwise you're going to have to fight for blood and lose more people to get, but we'll still leave you in a position to where you can, say, yes, this is a victory for us. This is a success. That's where we are right now. People need to really understand where we are. Get rid of these fantasies that, some negotiating trick is going to somehow make Putin forget that he has all the cards. It's not going to happen. And in fact, speaking of Trump and incoming, it was announced this week that General Keith Kellogg, former national security advisor to the vice president of the first Trump administration, is a special envoy for Trump for Ukraine when he takes office on January 20th. And a lot of people are saying this guy will come in because of all of his experience, and surely he'll help the matter.
This man will play a key role in all future U.S. negotiations. Keith Kellogg is a Vietnam War veteran who served as National Security Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence in the first Trump administration. In April, he published a strategy paper suggesting battle lines should be frozen and both sides should be forced to enter peace talks. Under his plan, any future U.S. military aid would be contingent on Ukraine joining the talks, and if Moscow refused, the U.S. would increase its support of Ukraine. As added incentive for Russia, Ukraine's desire to join NATO would be put off for an extended period.
So here's one of the first problems that I see with the elevation of Keith Kellogg. He published earlier this late spring, I think, this idea of how he would solve the Ukraine problem if he were to come in, if Trump were to win, et cetera. This is what he would advise. And you hear what he thinks is a leverage for the U.S. side is that if Putin isn't willing to negotiate the way we want, and by the way, a version of this was voiced by Sebastian Gorka about a week or so ago. If Putin doesn't play ball, then we'll come in and flood the zone. What's been given so far will be peanuts, said Gorka, in comparison to what we've done here. Kellogg had a similar comment there that we will continue to supply Ukraine with more and more weapons. That's where I got, like, were you actually a general? It says in that clip there that he was a Vietnam veteran. So he had combat experience apparently on the ground. I don't know actually what he did in Vietnam, but one would have to wonder, do you not know how war works? Because that's not, you're not going to be putting pressure on Putin by giving Zelensky more weapons, which already he doesn't have enough men to use. Russia's already more than 2-to-1 advantage inside Ukraine. All the troops that Ukraine has, especially the frontline fighters, they're more than doubled by the Russian side. And of course, they have more ammunition and everything else. We don't have that much more stuff to give. That's why this is an empty threat anyway, even at face value. We don't have, this huge amount of stuff to give. We've already given nearly all that there is. All the spare capacity is long since gone. And some of it's already cut into the bone, like long-range weapons, like the interceptor missiles. We've shown you before. We've admitted, the current administration publicly, we're threadbare on those things right now. We don't have them. Trump doesn't have them. That's not a card he can play. It's like a 2 going against a king or something like that. We just don't have it. So the fact that Kellogg is coming in thinking that that's actually something we can use is red flag number 1. Here is red flag number 2 when he was talking a week or so ago on this new Oreshnik missile.
He's used it for psychological reasons, and Jack Keane made a great comment on that. He didn't use it because it was militarily effective, because it hit a city, not very much damage there at all. But he's kind of saying to the West, well, see what I can do. And this is one where people have backed off. President Biden's backed off. When the minute he said IRBM, ICBM, nuclear war, we said, oh my gosh, we can't go there. That's when you need to lean in, because he meaning Putin, he will not start a nuclear war in Europe. And you'd remind him, let me make sure you understand, the Brits have nuclear weapons, the French have nuclear weapons, we've got nuclear weapons, don't go there. And we haven't really said that to him. So it's kind of a psychological play, and I think Jack Keane's got it right.
But why now?
Gary, go ahead and pull out of that one. That's
this...
enough there. I wanted to focus on that there. His comment that's a red flag number 2 and 3 and 4, maybe. We'll just get a bunch of them for that one. He's basically saying, Putin's never going to use nuclear weapons because we've got them too. That goes back to something we showed you that John Bolton said earlier this year, which is Putin would never use nuclear weapons because he knows that would be signing his own death warrant. Okay, you sign someone's death warrant with a nuclear weapon, there's 2 or 3 probably coming back in your direction to sign your own. See, I think that's what the part that we don't get that Putin does. I think that if Putin understands and if he uses nuclear weapons, then he is prepared for them to come back in the other direction. And that's a scary thing, because if he's consciously, correctly aware of what this may cause and still is willing to use them, that's much more dangerous than our side, who's saying he'll never do it. Well, actually, it's not more dangerous. It's a different kind of danger. They're equally bad, because if one nuclear weapon is used, then we have the possibility of escalation that could destroy everybody. And even if somehow, which would be the most incredibly different thing for any human on the planet, past, present, or future, if nuclear weapons start to get used and someone chooses not to continue the escalation and to allow things to sit there, that would be necessary for the survival of humanity. Maybe someone will do it. Maybe there can be the escalate to de-escalate, and it might actually work, because if one is used and then no one is willing to be saying that we're all dead, then that's not hyperbole, folks. That's reality. And the fact that he is willing to so casually dismiss that is a problem. And we're running low on time, so I actually had some other things to show, but it's just going to reinforce what we were already talking about here. We have some bad advisors in the United States, and I know Trump knows this guy. He worked with him before, and he probably has a good personal rapport. But gracious, I was going to show you some other stuff from March of 2022, 1 month into the war, October of 2022, when he was given terrible advice, things that were self-evidently not accurate at the time, and some of his advice was actually followed to disastrous results. And this is the guy who's going to be running the next one. And it just concerns me greatly to see that when Trump coming in with a good instinct, let's have a negotiated settlement to end this, he's got some very unrealistic advisors like Gorka, like General Kellogg, giving him advice that is detached from reality and may lead Trump to take actions that is not going to help the situation and could actually see it get worsened. We'll have to see how that plays out. But that's what you need to understand about this whole thing about Zelensky saying trading, territory for peace and getting in NATO, because there is no promise, no offer for NATO. So there's no basis for this to have it go anywhere except for an interview with the Telegraph. That's about as far as it's gone, and hopefully as far as it ever does go. It's time to have some reality in our negotiations. So, well, listen, that's a real brief show for you today, but stick around, because in just 3 minutes from now, we're going to have the full intel brief that we have every week, where we're going to tell you what you learned this week, so you don't miss anything important. Be sure to tune in 3 minutes, and we'll see you right there, Daniel Davis Deep Dive.